The mountains looked washed out, as if someone had taken a brush of white paint and dragged it across every edge. Daylight was everywhere, bright, flat, unforgiving, turning the snow into a mirror and the rock into jagged black seams. The team moved in a staggered line through the pass, boots biting into crust and scree beneath the powder. Their breath came out in short bursts. The wind skimmed the ridge tops and combed spindrift across the ground in ghostly sheets that made distance hard to judge. Halfway through the choke point, the first shot snapped like a branch breaking. Then another. 2 men went down almost at the same time, one folding as if someone had cut his strings, the other stumbling forward and collapsing face-first into the snow. A third voice shouted a name, and the line fractured into motion that was all instinct and training and panic refusing to call itself panic. They dove for cover that barely deserved the word. Broken shale that crumbled under gloves. A half-buried boulder line that offered only a few inches of concealment. A frozen drainage cut that should have been a trench but was more like a shallow scar, filled with wind-packed snow and ice. It was a textbook kill zone, tight walls, limited exits, and nowhere to build momentum. The kind of place you move through quickly, eyes high, prayer quiet. Except they hadn't been quick enough. Contact, someone shouted, and the rest of it vanished into a burst of gunfire that hammered the rock. The enemy didn't spray. They worked. Short bursts that walked men off cover, impact stitching snow into fountains. A heavier weapon some way upslope pinned the center with a steady, crushing rhythm. Not the frantic rattle of amateurs, but a measured beat that kept heads down and choices small. A dull thump echoed from higher ground. An RPG detonated against the rock face behind them, turning ice into shards that whirled like knives. The blast didn't kill anyone. It didn't need to. It was a message. You are fixed. The team leader raised his radio instinctively. Static. He tried again, switching channels, pressing the transmit with more force as if pressure could push signal through air that didn't want it. Static again. Thick, buzzing, alive with interference that sounded like a swarm of insects inside the speaker. Comms are dead, the comms specialist barked. Crouched low, his gloved hands moving fast over the controls. Jammed. Hard. That one sentence did something worse than the bullets. It took away the invisible scaffold that held everything together. No higher. No air. No quick extraction call. No clean coordination beyond what they could see and shout. Hand signals flashed. 2 fingers. A flat palm. A sharp point toward the slope that glittered in sunlight like broken glass. The team leader glanced up. High ground. Yes, but open. A pale incline with sparse rock ribs, and anyone moving across it would be a dark, perfect target against the white. Protocol said hold, coordinate, suppress, maneuver. Protocol assumed you could coordinate. Hey, coordination was a dream with dead batteries. Another burst chewed the boulder line. Stone chips peppered a helmet. Someone swore, but it wasn't anger. It was the sound fear makes when it tries to look tough. The medic crawled toward the first casualty, pushing himself forward with elbows, body low, backpack dragging a thin groove in the snow. He moved like he'd done it 100 times. His mind was on tourniquets and pressure and minutes. A round cracked into the rock beside him. Then another. The third one caught him. He flinched hard and went still for a second, like his body couldn't decide whether to keep going. Then he dragged himself back behind cover, one hand pressed to his side. Blood darkened his glove, too bright against the snow. For an instant, the heat of it sent steam upward, faint, haunting, a living thing in a dead place. Time pressure didn't just increase. It transformed. It became a countdown you could feel in your teeth. Medic hit. Someone yelled. Still moving. The medic snapped back, voice strained, refusing to be a casualty even before his body agreed. The enemy kept working. They fired didn't surge with excitement. It tightened, as if they were squeezing a net. And then the buzzing arrived. A small drone, black against the pale sky, banked over the pass. It moved with that uncanny smoothness of machines that don't feel cold. It looped, adjusted, hovered. It wasn't just watching. It was guiding. The team leader saw it and felt his stomach drop. A drone-man eyes that never blinked and a brain somewhere behind cover taking notes, correcting fire, cutting off hope. He aimed up, but the angle was wrong and the drone danced. A burst from the enemy heavy gun slammed into their boulder line, forcing him back down. "Stay low," he ordered, because it was the only order he could give that didn't depend on a radio. Their world narrowed to snow glare, rock grit, and the endless question of whether the next round had their name on it. Then, in the thin gap between volleys, when the enemy paused as if to take a breath, 10 sharp cracks cut through the air. Not a burst, not a spray. Single shots, evenly spaced, calm, mechanical in their timing, like a metronome clicking in a concert hall. The first crack was followed by a distant body dropping. The second crack, another figure slumped, collapsing mid-motion. The third, an RPG gunner fell backward as if yanked by an invisible rope. The fourth, the crew-served gun's rhythm stuttered, then stopped entirely, its barrel dipping into the snow. The fifth, a head snapped sideways. The sixth, another man folded. The seventh, a running silhouette tripped and didn't get back up. Each impact had a different echo, depending on what it struck, rock, bone, but the shots themselves held the same clean signature. One shooter, one voice. The SEALs froze, not from fear this time but from disbelief. They lifted their heads just enough to look, to search for muzzle flash, to find the high point that would explain it. There was nothing. No visible shooter. No obvious angle. The wind played tricks with sound, folding it, throwing it. The daylight stole shadows. All they had were bodies dropping in neat sequence, like someone was turning off lights. The enemy fire faltered, confusion rippling through the pass like a wave. Bursts became erratic. Shouts echoed from above, sharp and angry. Someone fired wildly, as if noise could reassert control. For the first time since contact, pressure eased. Not gone, just less crushing. The team leader scanned the ridge lines, then the rock seams, then the upper saddles. His eyes moved fast, but his mind was moving faster. Someone was helping. Someone had been there, unseen, and was now carving the enemy apart. But from where? And why now? The drone buzzed again overhead, dipping lower as if to see better. It tilted, adjusting its angle, chasing the source of the shots. The next crack came, and the drone jerked violently. A moment later, it spiraled, wobbling like a wounded bird, and slammed into the snow with a soft, final thud that felt impossible in the middle of all that violence. The team leader stared at the smoking fragment of plastic and metal. Whoever that shooter was, they could reach even the sky, and the pass, bright as it was, suddenly felt haunted. Earlier that morning, the world had still felt predictable. At the forward sight, the air smelled like fuel, cold metal, and bitter coffee. Men stood around a map board with their collars pulled up and their hands jammed into pockets. Whenever they weren't pointing at lines and contours. Breath rose in clouds. The sun was already strong, but the cold didn't care about sunlight. It lived in the ground, in the wind, in the bones of the place. The mission brief was clean, almost boring in the way good plans often are. A sensor relay on a ridgeline had gone silent overnight. No ping, no scheduled transmission, no automated heartbeat. It wasn't just some disposable gadget. It was part of a wider web of listening posts and eyes meant to keep the team ahead of whatever moved through these mountains. Hire wanted the relay verified, and more importantly, they wanted the data module recovered. Because the relay didn't just listen. It recorded routes, patterns, timing, call signs if it caught them. Any little habit that could become a weapon in someone else's hands. If the module was compromised, the mountains would stop being an environment and start being a trap. The team leader listened, calm. He'd done enough of these missions to know the difference between routine and risk, and this one sat right on the line. Daylight move, snow terrain, limited A assets, tight extraction window. But they were good at tight windows. They lived in them. His element was solid. The comm specialist was sharp, quiet confidence, fast hands. The medic was steady, with a dry sense of humor and the kind of focus that made everyone else feel safer. The heavy gunner carried weight without complaint, always a half step behind but never behind in awareness. They were the kind of small unit that moved like a single organism. Then the add-on arrived. She didn't make an entrance. She simply appeared at the edge of the group, wearing the same cold-weather gear, face partly hidden behind a neck gaiter, eyes taking in the map and the men without lingering anywhere too long. Her name was on the manifest under a bland title, Support Liaison, Technical Escort for the Sensor Package. It sounded like bureaucracy. It sounded like paperwork made human. Her introduction lasted less than 10 seconds. A nod from the officer, a glance at the team leader. She's with you. That was it. No speech. No backstory. No attempt to win them over. Someone muttered, "Guess we're babysitting today." A couple chuckles followed. She didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't glare. She simply adjusted her gloves and checked her pack straps like she'd heard nothing at all. The team leader clocked it and filed it away. People who didn't respond to jokes were either humorless or disciplined. Sometimes both. Then he saw what she carried. A long, rigid case, wrapped in plain cloth, no markings. It looked like a piece of equipment you'd expect to see near engineers or technicians, not an operator. "What's that?" the heavy gunner asked. Not rude, just curious. "Calibration gear," she said. Her voice was calm, low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Why are you carrying it?" someone else asked. "Because it's mine," she replied. And the conversation ended there. Not because she was intimidating, but because she was final. Like a door shutting without drama. They moved out under a sky so clear it felt like a trick. Snow glare reduced contrast, flattening the landscape until ridges and gullies blurred. Sound behaved strangely, sometimes carrying far, sometimes disappearing into the wind. Tracks mattered. Every ridge line was a silhouette risk. They kept their spacing tight enough to stay cohesive, loose enough to survive a blast. Their pace was steady, optimized to hit the pass by midday, touch the relay site, then exfil before the weather shifted in the afternoon. Assets were limited. The extraction window wasn't flexible. The mountains didn't care about plans. A mile into the approach, the first warning sign wasn't gunfire. It was stillness. No birds. No distant dogs. No faint movement on the slopes. Just wind and the crunch of their own boots. Then, boot prints. Not many. Faint, half-filled by drifting snow, but enough to raise the hair on the team leader's neck. They didn't match local patterns. Too uniform. Too purposeful. He knelt, gloved fingers brushing the edge of the print. Fresh enough to matter. The comm specialist shifted his pack and frowned. "Getting interference spikes," he said, almost casually, like he didn't want to give the word weight. "Could be atmospheric. Could be. Could be someone testing," the team leader finished. They shared a look. He considered turning around. Considered calling higher. Then he remembered the relay, silent overnight, and what that might mean. Mission pressure is a quiet bully. It doesn't shout. It simply stands behind you until you move forward. So they moved forward. The woman, still support on paper, walked slightly off-center of the stack. She wasn't in the way. She didn't demand space. But she also didn't drift. Her eyes kept flicking to high ground in a way that felt different. Not the scanning of someone looking for threat in general. The careful measuring of someone reading angles. At one rock seam, she paused, bringing binoculars up. She stared at a high saddle for a full 5 seconds. Then she lowered them and asked the team leader softly, "Any chance of alternate egress if the pass closes?" He glanced at her, surprised. "Pass closes." She shrugged. Small movement. Weather. Or people. He almost asked what she meant by people, but something in her tone told him she didn't speculate. She noticed. "We'll have options," he said, a lie that sounded confident enough to pass. She nodded once, as if accepting the answer without believing it. When they resumed movement, the team leader noticed a small card tucked into her sleeve near her wrist. For a second it flashed in the sunlight, tiny handwritten marks, notations. Then she adjusted her cuff and it disappeared. He told himself it was tech notes. But his mind didn't fully commit to that lie. They reached the approach to the pass. The wind shifted, bringing a sharper cold. The comm specialist radio hissed with interference again. Stronger, heavier. Then it vanished abruptly, like a switch being tested. The team leader felt it in his gut, a trigger being armed. And somewhere in all that bright snow and quiet movement, the woman carried her plain wrap case as if it weighed nothing at all. The pass narrowed like a fist closing. Rock walls rose on either side, jagged and dark, with snow wedged into every crack. The path underfoot was a mix of hard crust and loose scree hidden beneath powder, the kind of footing that punished haste. The team entered the choke point carefully, heads up, weapons ready, spacing tighter because the walls forced it. The first shots came the moment they lost lateral cover. Not random, not opportunistic, timed. A round snapped into the rock near the lead man's knee. Another caught a shoulder strap. Then two more hit with a precision that made the air feel planned. Down, the team leader shouted, and everyone dropped into whatever cover they could find. Then the jammer slammed on. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was a hard wall. Radios turned into angry static. The comms specialist ripped through settings, changed channels, tried backup frequencies, even an emergency burst mode. Nothing. Even GPS pings drifted and stuttered like a heartbeat under stress. "Hard jam," he yelled. "They are close." Enemy fire control tightened immediately after, as if the jam had been the last piece of a machine locking into place. A crew-served gun pinned the center with deliberate bursts. Riflemen on the slopes swept their edges, forcing their heads down whenever they tried to peek. An RPG team started walking. Blasts closer, not trying to hit directly at first, but corralling them tighter, shrinking their world. The medic crawled toward the wounded man, dragging him by his vest strap. A bullet snapped into the snow inches from his hand. Another hit rock, fragmenting into shards. He kept moving anyway. Then a second man screamed, a sharp, shocked sound that turned immediately into gritted silence. He'd been hit in the leg, not catastrophic but enough to slow him, enough to make every move louder, heavier. Blood drew a dark line across the white like ink. The wind kicked up spindrift in short, violent bursts. Not a full storm. Daylight still held, but enough to blur edges and soften silhouettes. Enough to hide movement on the enemy's side. The drone returned overhead, buzzing, circling, correcting fire with cold patience. The team leader watched it and realized the truth that landed like a weight. This wasn't just an ambush to kill. It was an ambush to control. Someone wanted them fixed in place. Someone wanted time. And when a plan wants time, it's usually because it's trying to take something. Ammo discipline became a problem fast. Shooting at shapes wasted rounds. Shooting to suppress without targets chewed through magazines. But if they didn't suppress, the enemy's fire would tighten until it became a vice. The heavy gunner fired in measured bursts, jaw clenched, choosing moments carefully. The team leader called hand signals, trying to coordinate a shift to higher ground. But every glance at the open slope felt like staring into a spotlight. Protocol said, smoke to cover movement. He signaled for it. A smoke canister arced out, hissing as it landed. Gray cloud bloomed against white snow. In normal terrain, it would have been a curtain. Hey, in bright daylight on snow, it looked like a beacon, an announcement. We're moving. Enemy fire adjusted instantly, bracketing the smoke, bullets stitching the edges. The team leader's stomach tightened. Their usual tools weren't just failing. They were being used against them. Then a voice echoed from above, amplified through a cheap speaker. Broken English, sharp and taunting. Special soldiers. Stay. We know you. Stay and die. The words were crude, but the intent was clear. The enemy knew what they were. Intel. Prepared. The team leader didn't have time to fully process it, because another RPG detonated, closer this time, shaking snow loose from the rock walls. The woman stayed low in a shadowed fold of rock, pressed into the cold as if she belonged to it. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch at the blasts. Instead, she watched the drones orbit like she was reading a clock. At one point, she shifted her pack, and the plain cloth on her long case loosened for a fraction of a second. Matte metal glinted beneath. Glass. The shape was unmistakable if you knew what you were looking at. The team, pinned and bleeding, didn't notice. Or maybe they did, but their minds refused to accept it. Footsteps crunched somewhere above and left, the sound faint but distinct in the thin air. The team leader's head snapped that direction. Movement. Enemy climbers, using a diagonal rock rib to creep down toward their flank. Smart. Quiet. Patient. A fold of the net tightening. The woman made a decision without announcing it. She tapped the team leader's boot, 2 quick touches. Then she pointed, high left, precise. He followed her finger and saw them, 2 dark figures hugging the rock, moving like spiders. He signaled the others, shifted fire to disrupt the climb. Too late to stop it clean, but enough to force them to pause. And that's when the first of the metronome shots began again. A single crack. One of the climbers jerked and disappeared behind a rock lip. Another crack. The second climber collapsed sideways, sliding a foot before snagging on a snow pocket. The seals froze, heads lifting, eyes searching for the source. Still nothing. Still no flash. Just the invisible hand of precision reaching into the fight and plucking out the enemy's best moves. The trap was still there, but for the first time, it was being contested by something the enemy hadn't planned for. Something that didn't need a radio. There's a particular kind of silence that exists only in gunfights. The silence between volleys, when everyone is reloading or repositioning or taking a breath they don't deserve. She waited for that silence. Then she moved. It wasn't dramatic. No heroic sprint. No shout. Just a shift of her weight, a slide out of the shallow cover line, a body flattening low to the snow as she flowed into the terrain like water finding a crack. Everyone else was busy. The medic tying a tourniquet with numb fingers, the comm specialist still fighting dead air, the team leader trying to read the fight with only his eyes. Her support status made her invisible. She used that invisibility like camouflage. She moved when the wind gusted hard enough to mask the crunch. She moved behind a low snow berm that looked like nothing until you were behind it. She slipped into a shadowed crevice where rock met drift and the light couldn't reach. Her boots didn't stomp. They pressed. Her breathing stayed measured, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she refused to let fear write the rhythm. She reached a broken ledge system partway up the left wall of the pass. It wasn't true high ground. It didn't tower, but it offered something better. A lateral angle. From here, she wasn't looking down the pass the way everyone else would. She was looking across it, into the seams where enemy control lived, the small pockets where a radio man would crouch, where a spotter would peek, where a drone controller would hide. Geometry over height. She laid her case down carefully, unwrapping the plain cloth without letting it snap in the wind. A long rifle emerged, matte and cold, built for this exact kind of work. Not flashy, not new, used. The optic sat atop it like a calm eye. She checked it and felt the first bite of constraint. The reticle illumination flickered, weak in the cold. The battery had been losing strength for hours. She didn't care, didn't hesitate. She simply switched to a simpler method. Daylight holds, memory, math done so many times it lived in muscle. She packed snow beneath her elbows, tamping it down to create a stable rest. The snow bit into her sleeves. Cold seeped through layers. Inside her glove, a scar crossed a knuckle, old, pale against skin. A tiny flash of a life lived close to hard edges. She inhaled slowly, held, exhaled halfway, and let the world narrow to the optics view. Down in the pass, the drone hovered, circling. She tracked its orbit. Not the drone itself, its pattern. Then she looked for the human behind it. There, a man tucked near an outcrop, antenna peeking above a rock, hand moving in small, precise motions. She took him. The shot was a clean crack swallowed by wind. The man collapsed, and the drone's smooth orbit stuttered, drifting as if confused. She didn't watch him fall. She was already shifting. Her next priority was the jammer. She scanned for unnatural shapes, a directional panel, a pack too rigid, a man too focused on equipment. There, a squat set up behind a rock fold, a man adjusting something with gloved hands, another feeding power from a generator-like pack. She waited for a wind lull. Then she broke the one touching the controls. The enemy's fire didn't stop, but it lost its choreography. Burst came a half-second too late. RPG timing slipped. Shouts rose, angry and urgent. Below, The SEALs felt it before they understood it, like a fist loosening. They still didn't know who was doing it. They only knew the enemy's confidence was wobbling. And the enemy noticed too. A spotter began glassing the ledges, optics flashing in sunlight. A pair of climbers peeled away from the flank push and started angling toward her position. Counterhunt. She fired sparingly, counting rounds without looking, the way a person counts steps on a familiar staircase. She refused emotional shots, refused to chase kills. Force multipliers only. Collapsed the structure. A round chipped her rock lip, sending a sting of stone into her cheek. She didn't flinch, only shifted 6 inches, changing her signature, refusing to let the enemy bracket her. Then she heard it, crunching above her. Not wind, not drifting snow. Footsteps. Hunters closing from higher ground. She pressed her cheek to the stock, eyes steady, and felt fear arrive fully, not as panic, but as information. Her next shots couldn't just kill. They had to buy a corridor. They had to create a path out of a place designed to have none. She built the ladder in her head the way some people built prayers. Not words. Priorities. Because she couldn't outshoot an entire ambush. She could only take away its hands. First, Overwatch. The one pinning movement corridors. The silent anchor that made every step lethal. Second, Signal. The people coordinating, reinforcing, keeping timing. Third, RPG teams. The ones forcing cover collapse. Fourth, Leaders. The ones turning bodies into decisions. Fifth, Crew-served gun. The one turning the pass into a grinder. She found Overwatch by behavior, not by gear. Overwatch doesn't fire like everyone else. Overwatch waits. Overwatch takes the shot that matters. She watched the slopes for the pause, the patience. There, a rifleman who wasn't shooting with a rest, who only peeked when someone moved, who held a line that made the slope impossible. She took him. The shot landed and he folded, and something shifted in the pass like air pressure changing. The kill zone felt suddenly wider. Below, the team leader sensed it immediately. He didn't know why, but he knew the enemy's grip had loosened. Then she went for signal. A man near the jammer setup raised his head, shouting, gesturing, trying to regain rhythm. She put the round through the problem. It wasn't just a kill. It was a fracture line. Enemy timing broke. Their flanking push hesitated as if uncertain whether it still had permission to exist. But the enemy wasn't stupid. They adapted. A smaller quad drone rose from behind cover, fast, nimble, sweeping the ledges, searching for muzzle signature, for movement, for the one variable they hadn't planned for. She didn't rush. She watched its behavior, waited for the moment it tilted into a predictable hover. Machines, for all their intelligence, still had habits. She snapped it down. The drone dropped, tumbling, and exploded softly against rock. But that shot line cost her. Now the enemy had a better idea of where to look. Counterhunt escalated. 2 hunters climbed high to look down into her ledge. Another team moved laterally, trying to cut off her retreat. They weren't panicking. They weren't screaming. They were methodical, like professionals who had just found a rival. Her barrel began to heat under steady firing. It wasn't smoking, but she could feel the subtle shift, heat shimmer threatening to distort sight if she pushed too hard. Snow beneath her support melted slightly, dampening her pack, making stability less certain. Constraints stacked like stones on her back. Below, the SEAL team leader recognized the pattern. Enemy hands disappearing, pressure easing in pulses. Someone was peeling the ambush apart from the edges. He shifted from survival mode to exploitation mode. He signaled a short bound. The heavy gunner laid down controlled bursts. The others dragged the wounded toward a deeper cut in the terrain, a frozen depression that offered better cover. They moved inches at a time, but inches mattered. The comm specialist's radio flickered. Weak signal, a thin thread pushing through the jam's broken rhythm. The team leader seized it. He transmitted a burst, coordinates, situation, a desperate update for extraction. Then the signal died again. But it was enough. A message sent into the world was a kind of hope. She continued the ladder. An RPG gunner knelt to reload, the tube angled toward the SEAL cover line. She took him before he could fire. A squad leader stood to wave the flank forward. Gestures big, body exposed, confident in numbers. She took him too. The assistant feeding the Crusoe gun leaned in, hands busy with the belt. She broke that rhythm. The heavy gun's roar sputtered, then went silent, replaced by scattered rifle fire that lacked coordination. The enemy tried a final solution. A heavier weapon came up, something that thumped deeper than an RPG, rounds landing with a cruel regularity, bracketing the seal cover line. Mortar. Not perfectly accurate, but accurate enough to force movement. And movement in snow glare was death. She searched for the mortar lead, the spotter, the one making the tube smarter than luck. He revealed himself in brief pop-ups, head rising just long enough to look, hand gesturing, correcting. She waited for the most confident moment. Then she fired. The spotter dropped. The mortar fire became blind, falling wider, less purposeful. The threat didn't vanish, but it lost its teeth. Enemy cohesion broke. Shooters began firing independently. Some retreated to new rocks. Others shouted in frustration. The pass stopped feeling like a net and started feeling like scattered danger. The hunters finally got eyes on her ledge. A round slashed her sleeve, burning a line of heat across her arm. Blood warmed her skin for a second before cold tried to claim it. She didn't look at the wound. She didn't have time. She shifted to her last reserve magazine, feeling the weight of it, the literal weight of what she had left. Seconds, not minutes. Below, the SEALs seized the opening. Smoke was used differently now, not to push, but to mask withdrawal. A canister rolled, hissing, blooming into a gray curtain that blended with spindrift in a way it hadn't earlier. They dragged the wounded, moving toward the extraction point they planned for a routine day. Now it was a lifeline. She kept firing, but only when the shot would change the fight. Then she saw him. Not just another fighter. Someone positioned slightly back, surrounded by runners, giving orders with sharp, decisive gestures. The kind of person whose survival mattered to the enemy more than any rifleman. Commander. She didn't rush. She didn't savor. She broke him. The man crumpled, and the effect rippled outward like a stone dropped into water. The remaining fighters hesitated, then began to disengage, not because they were merciful, but because the objective was slipping and dying here would buy nothing. They pulled back into the folds of the mountains, leaving the pass littered with their own dead and their own confusion. She stayed on her ledge a moment longer, watching for a final trick. None came. Then, with the same quiet discipline that had carried her into this fight, she began to move, because the rescue she created wasn't complete until she survived it too. The extraction came with rotors and snow wash, daylight turning strange as the sun slid lower. The aircraft's arrival was a blur of sound and grit, a storm of forced wind that flattened drifts and drove powder into every seam of gear. The team loaded wounded first. The medic, pale but stubborn, kept working even as he was guided aboard, one hand pressed to his own injury, the other still checking someone. Elsie's pulse like habit refused to die. The team leader boarded next, eyes still scanning out of reflex. The woman climbed and lost. Not theatrical, not seeking acknowledgement, just stepping into the aircraft as if it were another piece of terrain. Inside, the world became vibration, engine noise, and the sharp smell of blood mingled with fuel. No one spoke much. The kind of silence that follows survival was heavy, almost sacred. Back at the forward sight, the light shifted toward blue, shadows stretching long across snow. Med work continued. Gloves came off. Wounds were assessed. Names were checked. Only then, when the immediate urgency eased, did the team leader let the question rise to the surface. He looked at her across the cramped space, eyes tired, voice hoarse. "Who are you?" he asked. The room changed. Even the hum of heaters felt quieter. She hesitated, not because she feared the question, but because answers had consequences. Then she said it plainly. "I'm assigned," she replied. "Not advertised. A discreet program." An attached marksman kept off the spotlight for operational reasons. Her title on the manifest, Support Liaison, was deliberate misdirection. Paper armor, a way to let her travel without drawing attention from the wrong eyes. The team leader absorbed that, then nodded once, as if it explained everything in nothing. In the debrief, the enemy's motive came into focus. The sensor relay hadn't just gone silent by accident. It had been compromised and turned into bait. The data module inside recorded routes and call sign patterns, enough to map future insertions, enough to anticipate response times. The enemy had planned a capture-kill design for propaganda, for leverage, for turning a small unit's defeat into a story that could travel farther than bullets. That's why they'd been prepared. That's why the jammer had been tested in advance. That's why drones had hovered in daylight with no fear. They hadn't expected a variable that didn't need comms. They hadn't covered lateral geometry. They'd assumed threats would come from above, from obvious high ground. She'd used a broken ledge line, an angle no one respected because it wasn't dramatic. The data module was recovered intact. Their prize was denied. The plan failed on the objective that mattered most. After the formal words ended, the room softened into the awkward quiet of men who had almost died and weren't sure how to thank someone who didn't want thanks. The teammate who joked about babysitting earlier couldn't meet her eyes at first. Then he stepped closer, offered a simple nod. No speech, no apology. Just recognition the way professionals give it when they understand what they didn't understand before. She didn't smile. She simply returned the nod. Later, when the adrenaline finally drained, cold began to hurt in new ways. Frostbite threatened her fingertips, tiny needles of pain under the skin. The sleeve wound burned now that it had time to exist. The cost arrived, late and insistent, as it always did. She sat alone for a moment, rewrapping the rifle case in plain cloth, folding the corners with the same care she'd used before the pass, making it look like nothing. Because that was the point. A person like her didn't belong to noise. She belonged to the thin line between calm and chaos, where silence could become salvation. And in the end, the mountains didn't remember names. They remembered the moments when everything was falling apart, and someone quiet refused to let it.